Greetings everyone, my name is Daniel Wong, and for today I'll be presenting on the country Vietnam. Vietnam is like all Southeast Asian countries in its historic cultural division between lowland, more urbanized people with access to foreign goods and ideas through waterway connections and indigenous highlanders who farm rice in rugged mountainous regions. The latter groups of highland ethnic minorities are known in the Southeast Asian literature as hill tribes or Montangats in Vietnam. Vietnam is unique among the 11 nations of Southeast Asia because of its strong historical kingdom connections to China as well as India. What is now northern Vietnam was ruled by China for more than 1,000 years, between the 2nd century BCE and the 10th century CE. Ethnic Vietnamese have been both attracted to Chinese ideas and, at times, anxious to resist Chinese political rule for their own people. The Chinese-influenced northern kingdoms emerged around the fertile Red River Delta, where the national capital of Hanoi is today. This kingdom often rebelled against Chinese rule, and they eventually became stronger militarily than southern Hindu kingdoms ruled by Chams, who are linguistically related to Malays. The Chams built the Indianized Champa kingdom roughly contemporaneous with Angkor, although today they are a small ethnic minority within Vietnam with a significant Muslim population. The French sent Catholic missionaries to the Vietnam region beginning in the mid-17th century. When many of them were killed by Vietnamese emperors in the 1800s, the French government used their representation as a pretext for invasion and colonial conquest. Saigon was seized by the French Navy in 1859. During the following decades, the French repelled the Chinese, who also considered Vietnam as theirs, and expanded French territorial control over what are now the nations of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. They set their capital of Saigon in Vietnam's second fertile river delta region, the Mekong. Some Vietnamese communists today point to early anti-French communist groups that emerged in the North Vietnam in the 1930s, but no serious nationalist or communist movements emerged before World War II. The Japanese invaded French Indochina in 1940, and as everywhere, they claimed the slogan Asia for Asians. This revolutionary idea took hold throughout Southeast Asia, where local people were astounded to find out that their large and populous territories had been controlled by Europeans, with guns from relatively tiny and distant countries. In 1941, the Viet Minh organization was set up as the League for the Independence of Vietnam. A banished scholar of European Marxist ideas named Ho Chi Minh returned from exile to join the Viet Minh and free Vietnam from imperialist European control. The Viet Minh quickly seized the north and central regions of Vietnam from post-war Chinese control, while the French resumed control only of the south from British forces. The First Vietnam War between the French-controlled south and the communist-led north began in December 1946. In 1954, the French withdrew, leaving Vietnam an independent but divided nation. The United States sent troops to fight the communists throughout the 1960s, bombing also neighboring Cambodia. The United States ended its part in the Vietnam War in 1975. Saigon quickly fell to the communists who united North and South Vietnam. During the same year, the Communist Khmer Rouge seized control of Cambodia and ruled brutally until they were displaced by the Vietnamese troops in late 1978. In 1986, as the Cold War was ending, Vietnam began a series of market and social reforms, working to normalize its relations with the US states and open the country for tourism, which developed in the 1990s. Cambodia also aims to expand tourism to its sites at Angkor, although devastation from its 1970s civil wars have left the country in a poorer condition than Vietnam. Vietnam's 5-year plan, 1976 to 1997. The government's second 5-year plan aimed for extraordinarily high annual growth rates in industrial and agricultural sectors and national income and sought to integrate the North and the South, but the goals were not attained. The economy remained dominated by small-scale production, low labor productivity, unemployment, material and technological shortfalls, and insufficient food and consumer goods. The modest goals of the third 5-year plan 1981 to 85 were a compromise between ideological and pragmatic fashions. They emphasized the development of agriculture and industry. Efforts were also made to decentralize planning and improve the managerial skills of government officials. The economic difficulties. Since reunification in 1975, the economy of Vietnam has been plagued by enormous difficulties in production, imbalances in supply and demand, inefficiencies in distribution and circulation, soaring inflation rates, and rising debt problems. Vietnam is one of the few countries in modern history to experience a sharp economic deterioration in a post-war reconstruction period. Its peacetime economy is one of the poorest in the world and has shown negative to very slow growth in national output as well as in agriculture and industrial production. Vietnam's gross domestic product in 1984 was valued at US 18.1 billion with a per capita income estimated to be between US 200 and US 300 per year. Reasons for this mediocre economic performance have included severe climatic conditions that affected agricultural crops, bureaucratic mismanagement, elimination of private ownership, extinction of entrepreneurial classes in the south, and military occupation of Cambodia, which resulted in a cut-off of much-needed international aid for reconstruction. From the late 1970s until the early 1990s, Vietnam was a member of the Comecon and therefore was heavily dependent on the trade with the Soviet Union and its allies. Following the dissolution of the Comecon and its loss of its traditional trading partners, Vietnam was forced to liberalize trade, devalue its exchange rate to increase exports, and embark on a policy of economic development. In the late 1986, Vietnam launched a political and economic renewal campaign Doi Moi that introduced reforms to facilitate the transition from a centralized economy to a socialist-oriented market economy. Doi Moi combined government planning with free market incentives and encouraged the establishment of private businesses and foreign investment, including foreign-owned enterprises. Furthermore, the Vietnam government stressed the necessity to lower birth rates when developing the economic and social rights of the population by implementing a policy that restricted the number of children per household to 2, called the two-child policy. By the late 1990s, the success of the business and agricultural reforms ushered in under Doi Moi was evident. More than 30,000 private businesses have been created, the economy was growing at an annual rate of more than 7%, and poverty was nearly halved. Throughout the 1990s, exports increased significantly, growing by as much as 20% to 30% in some years. In 1999, exports accounted for 40% of GDP, an impressive performance in the midst of the economic crisis that hit other countries in Asia. Vietnam became a member of the World Trade Organization in 2007, which freed Vietnam from textile quotas enacted worldwide as part of the Multi-Fiber Arrangement in 1974. The MFA placed restrictions on the import by industrialized countries of textiles from developing countries. For China and other WTO members, however, textile quotas under the MFA expired at the end of 2004 as agreed in the Uruguay round of trade negotiations in 1994. Agriculture, fishery, and forestry. In 2003, Vietnam produced an estimated of 30.7 million cubic meters of wood. Production of sawn wood was a more modest 2,950 cubic meters. In 1992, in response to dwindling forests, Vietnam imposed a ban on the export of logs and raw timber. In 1997, the ban was extended to all timber products except wooden artifacts. During the 1990s, Vietnam began to reclaim land for forests with a tree planting program. Vietnam's fishing industry, which has abundant resources given the country's long coastline and extensive network of rivers and lakes, has generally experienced moderate growth. In 2003, the total catch was about 2.6 million tons. However, seafood exports increased fourfold between 1990 and 2002 to more than $2 billion, driven in part by shrimp farms in the south and catfish, which are a different species from their American counterparts, but are marketed in the US under the same name. By selling vast quantities of shrimp and catfish to the US, Vietnam triggered anti-dumping complaints by the US, which imposed tariffs in the case of catfish and was considering doing the same for shrimp. In 2005, the seafood industry began to focus on domestic demand to compensate for declining exports. Vietnam is one of the top rice exporting countries in the world, but the limited sophistication of small-scale Vietnamese farmers causes quality to suffer. Vietnam is the world's second largest exporter of coffee too. Energy, mining, and minerals. Petroleum is the main source of energy, followed by coal, which contributes about 25% of the country's energy excluding biomass. Vietnam's oil reserves are in the range of 270 to 500 million tons. Oil production rose rapidly to 403,000 barrels per day in 2004, but output is believed to have peaked and is expected to decline gradually. In 2003, mining and quarrying accounted for 9.4% of GDP, and the sector employed 0.7% of the workforce. Petroleum and coal are the main mineral exports. Also mined are antimony, bauxite, chromium, gold, iron, natural phosphates, tin, and zinc. Crude oil was Vietnam's leading export until the late 2000s, when high-tech electrical manufacturers emerged to become the biggest export market. By 2014, crude oil comprised only 5% of Vietnamese exports, compared to 20% of all exports in 1996. This is in part because Vietnam crude oil peaked in 2004, when the crude oil represented 22% of all Vietnam export earnings. Petroleum exports are in the form of crude petroleum because Vietnam has a very limited refining capacity. Vietnam's only operational refinery, a facility at Cát Hai near Ho Chi Minh City, has a capacity of only 800 barrels per day. Refined petroleum accounted for 10.2% of total imports in 2002. As of 2012, Vietnam had only one refinery, the Dang Quang refinery, but the second one, the Nghi Son refinery, was planned and was scheduled for construction in May 2013. Vietnam's anthracite coal reserves are estimated at 3.7 billion tons. Coal production was almost 19 million tons in 2003, compared with 9.6 million tons in 1999. Vietnam's potential natural gas reserves are 1.3 trillion cubic meters. In 2002, Vietnam brought ashore 2.26 billion cubic meters of natural gas. Hydroelectric power is another source of energy. In 2004, Vietnam confirmed plans to build a nuclear power plant with Russian assistance, and the second by a Japanese group. Industry and manufacturing. Although the industrial sector contributed 40.1% of GDP in 2004, it employed only 12.9% of the workforce. In 2000, 22.4% of industrial production was attributed to non-state activities. From 1994 to 2004, the industrial sector grew at an average annual rate of 10.3%. Manufacturing contributed 20.3% of GDP in 2004, while employing 10.2% of the workforce. From 1994 to 2004, manufacturing GDP grew at an average annual rate of 11.2%. The top manufacturing sectors, food processing, cigarettes and tobacco, textiles, chemicals, and electro goods, experienced rapid growth. Benefits from its proximity to China with lower labor costs. Vietnam is also becoming a new manufacturing hub in Asia, especially for Japanese and Korean firms. For instance, Samsung produces about 40% of its phone in Vietnam. Services and tourism. In 2004, services accounted for 38.2% of gross domestic product. From 1994 to 2004, GDP attributable to the service sector grew at an average annual rate of 6%. In 2012, Vietnam welcomed 6.8 million international visitors, and the number is expected to be more than 7 million in 2013. Vietnam keeps emerging as an attractive destination. In TripAdvisor's list of top 25 destinations, Asia 2013 by Traveller's Choice, there are 4 cities of Vietnam, namely Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh City, Hoi An, and Ha Long. In 2016, it is the first year ever which Vietnam welcomed over 10 million international visitors. Banking and finance. Most efficient and reliable banks are the largest, also state-owned ones: Vietinbank, BIDV, and Vietcombank. The banking sector is dominated by 3 institutions. There is also a trend of foreign investment into profitable banks. For example, Vietinbank is currently owned by Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi UFJ 20%, and International Finance Corporation 10%, while Vietcombank is owned by Mizuho, who owns 50%. Banking system. The banking sector has 2 tiers. The first tier is SBV, being responsible for conducting monetary policy and for supervision and regulation of the banking system. The second tier includes commercial banks, financial companies, credit cooperatives, people's credit funds, and insurance companies. This section focuses only on the commercial banks, which consist of state-run banks, joint stock banks, joint venture banks, foreign bank branches, and foreign bank ROs. Amongst all, foreign banks wishing to establish a presence in Vietnam has a choice of 4 types, including joint venture banks, wholly foreign-owned banks, foreign bank branches, and foreign bank ROs. All the applications for and registrations in relation to those types are subject to the jurisdiction of SBV. Subject to the specific regulations of SBV, a new joint venture bank must follow application procedures as applicable to joint venture established under the LI. Subject to the license from SBV, joint venture banks can offer a wide range of banking services in Vietnam. The local partner to joint venture bank must be an existing commercial bank. The minimum required capital for a joint venture bank is US $50 million effective of 2008 and US $150 million effective of 2010. Like joint venture banks, foreign bank branches are entitled to provide permitted banking services in Vietnam. The minimum required capital for a branch is US $50 million. Foreign bank ROs are not allowed to offer banking services in Vietnam. Naturally, they are dowry representatives of foreign banks in Vietnam, which can only do market researches and support their parent bank services. Generally, joint venture banks, wholly foreign-owned banks, and foreign bank branches are subject to the same taxes applicable to other businesses. Exports. In 2015, Vietnam exported $185 billion, making it the 24th largest exporter in the world. During the last 5 years, the exports of Vietnam have increased at an annualized rate of 18.6% from 77.3 billion in 2010 to 185 billion in 2015. The most recent exports are led by broadcasting equipment, which represents 16.3% of the total exports of Vietnam, followed by integrated circuits, which account for 5.81%. Imports. In 2015, Vietnam imported $169 billion, making it the 27th largest importer in the world. During the last 5 years, the imports of Vietnam have increased at an annualized rate of 13.8%, from 84.6 billion in 2010 to 169 billion in 2015. The most recent imports are led by integrated circuits, which represent 6.62% of the total imports of Vietnam, followed by telephones, which account for 6.24%. Trade balance. As of 2015, Vietnam had a positive trade balance of 15.8 billion in net exports, as compared to their trade balance in 1995, when they had a negative trade balance of 2.29 billion in net imports. Destinations. The top destinations of Vietnam are the United States, 38.1 billion, China, 19.2 billion, Japan, 15 billion, South Korea, 9.6 billion, and Germany, 8.71 billion. Import origins. The top import origins of Vietnam are China, which holds 49.8 billion, South Korea, 26.6 billion, Japan, 13.1 billion, other parts of Asia, 9.9 billion, and Thailand, 8.51 billion. Economic complexity of Vietnam. Product space. The product space is a network connecting products that are likely to be co-exported and can be used to predict the evolution of a country's export structure. The economy of Vietnam has an economic complexity index of negative 0.578, making it the 93rd most complex country. Vietnam exports 240 products with reviewed comparative advantage, meaning that its share of global exports is larger than what would be expected from the size of its export economy and the size of products of global market. Complexity and income equality. In this version of the product space, products are colored according to their Product Gini Index, or PGI. The PGI of a product is the level of income inequality that we expect for the countries that export a product. Economic complexity ranking. The economic complexity ranking of Vietnam has decreased by 31 places over the past 31 years, from 62 in 1984 to 93 in 2015. Doing business in Vietnam, political and legal environment, political and legislative system. The constitution in general establishes the mastery of the people under the leadership of the Communist Party, of which the highest representation is the Politburo and the Party Secretary General. The power of the people is to be exercised through the National Assembly at the central level and the People's Councils at different local levels. The National Assembly is the supreme representative and the legislative body, and determines both domestic and foreign policy. It is elected by universal suffrage. The National Assembly in turn elects and may remove from office the President, Vice President, Chairman of the National Assembly, Vice Chairman of the National Assembly, members of the Standing Committee of the National Assembly, the Prime Minister, the Chief Justice of the Supreme People's Court, and the head of the Supreme People's Bureaucracy. In addition, the National Assembly has the responsibility of sanctioning the Prime Minister's selection of Deputy Prime Ministers and Ministers. The National Assembly is also responsible for approving the organization of the government and its agencies, and is the supreme law-making body. The duration of the National Assembly is 5 years and elections are held 2 months prior to the expiry of its term. The Standing Committee possesses the power to manage the day-to-day affairs of the National Assembly when it is not in session, and during this time, the Standing Committee assumes all its powers, including the law-making power on matters entrusted to it by the National Assembly. People Committees and People Councils. The head of state is a president. He is elected by the National Assembly and represents the nation internally and externally. The highest executive body in Vietnam is the government, formerly known as the Council of Ministers. It is charged generally with the management of the economy and the state. It is made up of the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Ministers, Ministers and Chairmen of various state committees, and the Governor of the State Bank. Individual ministries and organizations equivalent to ministries aid the Prime Minister in the administration of the country within the specific fields in which they have jurisdiction. The Deputy Prime Ministers and the Ministers are selected by the Prime Minister but must be approved by the National Assembly. With the exemption of the Prime Minister, the members of the government do not have to be members of the National Assembly. Decisions on major issues must be taken on majority basis. Below the government people are People's Committees and People's Councils. The People's Councils are elected by the people and in turn elect the People's Committees. These bodies occurs at the level of city or province, district and commune. Each city, province, district and commune is governed by a People's Committee. The court and prosecution systems in Vietnam have a structure similar to the administrative system. In the central level, the Supreme People's Court is the highest judicial body in Vietnam, and the Chief Justice is elected by the National Assembly for the term of the National Assembly. The Supreme People's Bureaucracy has the highest power on prosecution in Vietnam, and the head is also elected by the National Assembly for the term of the National Assembly. In local levels, these bodies occur at the levels of city, province, and district. Legal system. In Vietnam, the legal system comprises of constitution, codes, laws, ordinances, decrees, decisions, circulars, directives, and official letters to some extent. Although all have the force of law, only a law passed by the National Assembly is referred to as such. Ordinances are issued by the Standing Committee of the National Assembly, commonly to regulate on an area where a law is not yet promulgated and/or regulated. On matters that the National Assembly entrusted to the government issues decrees or decisions or directives to implement the issued laws or ordinances. Circulars, decisions, and regulations are normally issued by individual ministries and other state agencies, including People's Committees, with respect to the subjects within their sphere of responsibility and the force of subordinate legislation. It should be noted when using that codes, laws, and ordinances are referred to by the name, decrees, decisions, circulars, and directives are usually referred to by the number, signing date, and the name of the issuer. Conclusion. The government of Vietnam continues to further economic and trade integration through liberalization of the multilateral, regional, and bilateral levels. Whilst firmly committed to strengthening the multilateral trading system and further liberalizing trade through multilateral negotiations under the WTO, the government of Vietnam is also actively pursuing regional and bilateral trade policies to achieve additional trade liberalization through free trade agreements with its main trading partners. The government of Vietnam's view about regional trade agreements is that they should be complementary to the multilateral trading system and fully compatible with relevant WTO provisions. Vietnam is a country of changes and currently offering increasing opportunities for foreign businesses. The underlying strength of the economy is reflected in, among others, controlled macroeconomic indicators, strong productivity gains, and extensive integration into regional and global economy. These are promising signs which indicates that Vietnam is a country with high potential for foreign investors. Cảm ơn, thank you.